Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are attempting something. Well, it's arguably the most ambitious thing we've ever tried to tackle in a single sitting.
It's a pretty heavy lift.
Usually we take one book or one article and we really drill down.
Right.
Today, we are trying to solve the two fundamental paradoxes of the human experience.
Yeah, it's a lot. We aren't just looking at one event or one study. We are trying to construct a kind of unified theory of us.
Of us, exactly.
We're looking at these two huge origin stories that really define the human condition.
And there's stories you usually see treated as completely separate things, right?
Yeah.
They live in different departments at the university.
Absolutely separate.
If you want to know about the first one, you go to a biology class, you look at a human, and then you look at a chimp.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to ask, how did we, these relatively weak, hairless, slow primates, end up with these massive, energy-guzzling supercomputers in our skulls? How did we become biologically human?
That is origin story number one, the biological mystery. How in the world did we afford the energy bill for our brains? It's a real puzzle.
And then you have origin story number two, which, that usually lives in the economics or political science department.
Right.
For the vast, vast majority of our existence, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years, we lived in these egalitarian bands. If you killed a gazelle, you shared it.
You had to.
If you tried to act like a king, your friends would probably throw rocks at you until you stopped.
Or worse. I mean, they'd just leave you. Exile was a death sentence back then.
Exactly. But then, relatively recently, in the grand scheme of things, we broke that contract. We shifted into societies defined by massive, enduring wealth inequality.
We really did.
We went from what's mine is yours to
Yeah.
pyramids, palaces, and the 1%.
And the fascinating thing about the stack of research we have today is that it argues these two stories aren't separate at all.
They're connected.
They are actually a sequence. The way we mastered energy, specifically food, set us up for the biological transformation. And then thousands and thousands of years later, the way we mastered material wealth, specifically how we produced that food, that locked us into the social transformation.
So it's a story of unintended consequences. We are going to trace the line from the first cooking fire to, I guess, the first billionaire.
And along the way, we're going to debunk a lot of what people think they know about where inequality comes from. Because the standard story, well, it turns out it's mostly wrong.
Okay, let's talk about the stack then. We are deep in the weeds of anthropology and archaeology today.
Very deep.
We have a set of dense notes on the impact of agriculture on human society and health. Then we have a really fascinating paper titled What Made Us Human by Liesl Driver, which is a deep dive analysis of Richard Wrangham's famous cooking hypothesis.
Which is one of those theories that once you hear it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
It changes how you look at every single meal.
And finally, the heavy hitter, The Origins of Enduring Economic Inequality by Samuel Bowles and Mattia Fotosato.
That's the one.
This is a massive survey. I mean, they didn't just guess. They looked at archaeological sites, burial mounds, economic models, all to measure the Giardini coefficient of the ancient world.
It is a crucial paper because it directly challenges that textbook story, the one we all kind of learned in school about farming and inequality.
Okay. So here's the mission for today. We are going to figure out the biological hack that allowed us to evolve in the first place. Then we're going to look at the aggressive egalitarianism of our ancestors. I love that term.
It's a great term.
And we're going to identify the specific moment, the smoking gun technology that locked us into hierarchies. And spoiler alert, it isn't just farming.
No, it is much, much more specific than that.
All right, let's start with the body. Segment 1, the biological foundation. Before we can even talk about rich and poor, we have to talk about how we became human. And this starts with fire.
Right. This is the cooking hypothesis. And to get it, you have to understand what it replaced. For a long time, the dominant theory was man the hunter.
Sure, I can picture it now. The diorama in the Natural History Museum.
Exactly.
There's a guy, probably has a beard. He's standing on the savannah, holding a spear, looking all heroic.
That's the image. And the idea was that hunting gave us meat, meat gave us protein, and that protein gave us big brains. Simple as that.
Seemed logical.
It was the consensus for decades. But Richard Wrangham comes along and points out a pretty big flaw in that logic.
Which is?
Raw meat is incredibly inefficient. It's tough, it's chewy, and your body has to work very, very hard to break it down and get the nutrients out.
So it's not just about getting the meat, it's about what your body can do with it after you eat it.
Precisely. Wrangham argues that the real game changer wasn't just what we ate, but how we prepared it. He argues that the control of fire and the invention of cooking was the primary driver of human evolution.
That is a massive claim. He's basically saying a barbecue is more important to our evolution than the spear itself.
In terms of our biological evolution, yes, absolutely. Think about it in terms of energy physics.
Okay.
Life, at its most basic level, is a quest for calories. Evolution favors the organism that can get the most energy output for the least energy input.
The most bang for your buck.
The most bang for your buck. And Wrangham points out a simple chemical reality. Cooked food provides significantly more net energy than raw food.
Okay, I want to drill down on this because I think most of us assume a potato is a potato.
Right.
If I eat it raw or if I eat it baked, the calorie count on the side of the box would be the same.
Well, yes and no. Technically, if you put it in a bomb calorimeter, which is the device they use in a lab to measure calories, it might show similar potential energy.
Right.
But your body isn't a bomb calorimeter. Your body has to do work to get that energy out. It has a digestive budget. And when you cook food, two amazing things happen chemically: gelatinization and denaturation.
Okay, big words. Let's unpack those. Gelatinization first.
This applies to starches. So think about a raw potato or a raw yam or any kind of root vegetable. At a microscopic level, the starch is packed into these tight, hard, crystalline structures.
Like little energetic bricks.
Exactly. And your digestive enzymes are trying to hack away at these crystals, but it's slow, hard work. A lot of it just passes right through you undigested.
So you're eating the calories, but you aren't actually keeping them. Your body can't access them.
It can't. You lose a huge percentage. But when you heat that starch in water, when you cook it, those granules swell up with moisture and they burst. The crystalline structure collapses and turns into a kind of gel.
Gelatinization.
That's it. No, your enzymes can just rush in and break it down almost instantly. It's like the difference between trying to break into a locked safe versus walking through an open door.
So cooking is basically pre-digesting the food in the pot. You're doing the work outside your body.
You are outsourcing the digestive work to the fire. And denaturation is the same exact principle, but for proteins.
For the meat.
For the meat. Proteins in raw meat are like these tightly coiled balls of yarn. They're complex and hard to cut. Heat causes them to unwind to denature. It opens them up so your body's enzymes can get in there and absorb the amino acids way more efficiently.
So by cooking, we effectively hacked the energy equation. We just got this massive surge of calories that other primates weren't getting.
A massive surge, and we spent less energy getting them, which leads us to maybe the most important concept in this whole section, the expensive tissue hypothesis.
I love this term. It sounds like we're discussing, I don't know, high-end curtains or something, but we're talking about anatomy.
We are talking about organs. So here's the trade-off. Your body has a metabolic budget. You produce a certain amount of energy every single day. And you have two very, very expensive organs competing for that energy.
One is the brain, obviously. I've heard this before.
Right. The brain is an absolute luxury item. It's only about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes 20% of your daily energy. It's a massive heat sink.
Okay, so that's one. What's the other one?
The other expensive system is the gut, the stomach, the intestines, the colon. Digestion is hard metabolic work.
Especially if you're eating like raw leaves and fibrous plants all day long.
Exactly. I mean, look at a gorilla or a chimp. They have these huge barrel chests and these distended bellies. They're not fat.
No, that's all organ.
That's all organ. They need massive digestive tracts, huge fermentation tanks to break down that low-quality raw food. So they have big guts and, as a result, relatively small brains.
Because they can't afford both. The budget won't allow it.
The budget won't allow for two luxury items.
Yeah.
Evolution had to make a choice. But now look at humans. We have flat stomachs. Our guts are tiny.
How tiny?
The research says our guts are about 60% of the size you would expect for a primate of our body mass. We have extraordinarily small digestive tracts.
So we shrank the gut?
We shrank the gut because we didn't need it anymore. We had the fire doing the hard work for us. And the energy savings from shrinking that expensive tissue, it had to go somewhere.
It went straight upstairs.
To the brain.
To the brain.
That is the mechanism. We went from our ancestors, like the Australopithecines with 400 cc brains, that's chimp size, to Homo erectus, and eventually to us, with 1400 cc brains. We literally built a supercomputer on the energy savings of a smaller stomach.
That is such a cool way to frame it. We traded our stomachs for our minds.
That's the trade. And the timeline supports this perfectly. This big transition kicks off around 1.8 or 1.9 million years ago. This is the emergence of Homo erectus.
Okay.
And when you look at the fossils of Homo erectus, they are the first ones who really start to look like us. They're tall, long-legged.
And the face, right. The notes say the face changed dramatically.
The face is the giveaway. If you are chewing raw meat and tough tubers for 6 hours a day, you need massive jaw muscles, you need huge molars like grinding stones.
Yep.
You need a sagittal crest, that's that ridge of bone on top of the skull that you see on gorillas to anchor all those muscles.
Right.
Homo erectus lost all of that. Their teeth got smaller, their jaws got smaller, their faces became flatter, more delicate.
Because the food was soft.
Because the food was cooked. We lost all that heavy-duty biological machinery because we simply didn't need it anymore.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second because I know listeners are thinking about it. There is a whole movement of raw foodists today. People who say cooking kills the nutrients and that eating raw is more natural. If we evolved this way, why do people do that? And, I mean, is it healthy?
It's a great question, and the source material actually discusses this directly. It cites a study called the Gessen Raw Food Study.
Okay.
This was a really comprehensive look at modern humans living on 100% raw food diets. And the results were, well, they were telling.
Telling in a bad way.
Biologically, yes.
Okay.
The participants almost universally suffered from chronic energy deficiency. They were extremely thin, often underweight, but the most shocking statistic was about reproduction.
Uh-oh.
About 50% of the women in the study developed amenorrhea.
They stopped menstruating.
Completely. Their bodies effectively said, we do not have enough energy reserves to support a pregnancy, shut down the entire reproductive system.
Which, in evolutionary terms, is a complete disaster. It's a dead end.
It is the definition of extinction. If half your females stop being able to reproduce, your species dies out in a couple of generations. This suggests that we are not just able to eat cooked food, we are biologically dependent on it. We are the cooking ape.
We can't go back.
We cannot survive and reproduce effectively in the wild on a raw diet. We have burned that evolutionary bridge behind us.
Wow. So that defines us biologically. But the notes also mention that this shift to cooking changed us socially, too.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about digestion. It fundamentally changed how we lived our days.
It changed the clock. I mean, just think about the act of chewing. Chewing. If you look at our primate cousins, like chimps, they spend a huge portion of their waking hours just chewing. Sitting there, grinding away, hours and hours. It is estimated that if modern humans tried to eat a raw diet adequate to fuel our current bodies, we would have to spend 42% of our day chewing.
42%, that's what, 5-6 hours?
Over 6 hours every single day, just jaw mashing.
I get annoyed if I have to wait 5 minutes for the microwave. I cannot imagine spending a third of my waking life just chewing celery.
Exactly. So cooking gave us the gift of time. It created this massive surplus of hours in the day. And that is time you can use for more efficient hunting, for tool making, for socializing, for storytelling.
It created culture.
It created the cultural time that makes us human.
And Wrangham argues it also created the structure of the family, right? The male-female bond.
Yes, this is his economic pact theory. It's a bit more controversial, but the logic is fascinating. In a raw food world, everyone kind of forages for themselves. You eat what you find when you find it.
You're on your own.
But cooking requires a central location. It requires a hearth, a home base.
You have to bring the food back to the fire. You can't just cook a berry on the bush.
Right. And Wrangham argues this created a natural division of labor. Hunting is high risk, high reward. You might spend all day and catch a huge gazelle, or you might catch nothing and come back starving.
While gathering is the opposite.
Gathering and cooking is lower risk. You can almost always find some tubers or berries, but it's high effort and time consuming.
So the pact is, the man says, I'll go hunt and take the big risks if you stay here, guard the fire, and ensure there's a cooked meal waiting for me either way.
And the woman says, I'll do the reliable cooking and gathering, but I need you to protect me in the food stores because the smell of cooking attracts predators and thieves. It created this bond of mutual dependence.
The first household.
The first household was formed around the cooking fire.
It's amazing to think that the simple concept of dinner time might be the fundamental glue that held early humanity together.
It absolutely was. It created a social center.
And there is one more biological adaptation you mentioned in here that I found kind of terrifying. Sleeping on the ground.
Oh, yes. This is a huge shift that people don't think about. If you look at our ape cousins, chimps, gorillas, orangutans, they all sleep in trees. They build these intricate nests high up in the canopy. Why?
Predators, leopards.
Exactly. Leopards, lions, hyenas. The ground is death at night in Africa. But Homo erectus lost the climbing adaptations. Their arms got shorter, their legs got longer. They were built for long-distance walking and running, not for climbing trees.
Which implies they were sleeping on the ground.
It does, which seems completely suicidal.
Unless
you have a weapon that scares away a lion.
Fire.
The campfire allowed us to come down from the trees. It was our shield in the darkness. So cooking didn't just feed us, the fire itself protected us, which in turn allowed us to change our entire skeletal structure to become better walkers.
Let's just try to summarize segment 1 here. We have fire, we have cooking. Because of that, we have big brains, we have small guts, we have flat faces, we have free time, we have social bonds. We are, for all intents and purposes, human.
We are human, but were we unequal?
That is the big question. For a very long time, the evidence suggests no. Biologically, we were fairly egalitarian. We lived in these small bands where sharing was absolutely mandatory for survival.
Right.
So how do we break that? How do we get to the world of billionaires and deep poverty? That brings us to segment 2, the inequality puzzle.
And to really understand this, we have to dismantle a very famous and very persistent myth. It's often called the Engels-Morgan hypothesis from Friedrich Engels and Lewis Henry Morgan.
This is the standard story. I mean, I'm almost certain I learned this in high school history class. Humans were happy hunter-gatherers.
The noble savage idea.
The noble savage, exactly. Then we discovered farming. We settled down. We produced a surplus extra grain in the storeroom. And because we had extra stuff, some strong guy, some bully came along and said, "That's all mine now."
Yeah.
And suddenly, we had rich and poor. Farming was the original sin that kicked us out of the Garden of Eden.
That is the story. And it feels intuitive. It feels logical. It has that fall from grace vibe that we find compelling. But Bowles and Fotisato, the authors of our main economic paper, they say the data just does not back that up at all.
The archaeology says, not so fast.
The archaeology says it's way more complicated. They went out and looked at Gini coefficients from thousands of years of history.
Let's do a quick refresher on the Gini coefficient for anyone who's forgotten their Econ 101.
Sure. It's the standard measure of inequality in a society. It's a scale that runs from 0 to 1.
Okay.
A Gini of 0 means perfect equality. Every single person has the exact same amount of wealth. A Gini of 1 means perfect inequality. One person owns everything and everyone else has absolutely 0.
And just for context, where are we today in most developed countries?
Modern wealth inequality is usually somewhere around 0.7 or 0.8. In some places even higher. It's quite high.
Okay. So what did Bowles and Fotisato find in the ancient world? What was the Gini for hunter-gatherers?
They found that hunter-gatherers had a Gini of about 0.307. So, relatively equal. There were differences, but not massive ones.
Okay, 0.30. So now the big reveal. What happens when farming starts? When they looked at the early farmers, the first people to settle down and plant seeds, specifically what we call hoe farmers, what was their Gini?
It was about 0.355.
Wait a minute. So it went from 0.30 to 0.35. That's barely a blip.
It's almost a rounding error. It shows that farming itself did not break the system. For thousands of years after the invention of agriculture, humans remained remarkably equal.
That just blows my mind. We always associate cities and farms with kings and priests and hierarchies. But you're saying there were massive villages that were basically egalitarian.
Yes. And this is the absolute key point of this whole section. They weren't egalitarian by accident. They were egalitarian on purpose. The researchers call this aggressive egalitarianism.
I just love that phrase so much. Aggressive egalitarianism. It implies you have to fight for it. It's not the default state of nature. It's a choice you have to keep making.
It is constant vigilance. It's an active social project. And the best example of this is a place called Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey.
Çatalhöyük, yes. This is one of my favorite archaeological sites. It's like a honeycomb, right? A city with no streets.
It looks like a wasp nest made of mud brick. I mean, it's bizarre. There were no streets, no doors. All the houses were just jammed together, sharing walls. You entered your house through a hole in the roof, climbing down a ladder.
So everyone is literally living on top of each other. There's no privacy, no big mansion on the hill.
None. And this city, or proto-city, lasted for over 1,000 years, thousands of people living there. And for most of that time, there is almost zero evidence of a ruling class. No palaces, no big temples hoarding wealth. The houses are all roughly the same size and have the same layout.
So how did they do it? How did they stop people from getting rich? Because surely some farmers were better than others. Some years you get lucky with the harvest, some people are just greedier.
They had powerful social codes and rituals to suppress that impulse. One of the most fascinating was their burial practices. At Saddlehhook, people were buried under the floors of the houses.
Which is a bit creepy, but okay. I can see how that keeps your ancestors close.
But here is the crazy twist. DNA analysis of the skeletons shows that the people buried under a house weren't necessarily biologically related to the people living above them.
What? So you're not living with your biological parents?
It seems that children might have been circulated or fostered across the community. It wasn't about the nuclear family. And even weirder, skulls of ancestors were frequently dug up and circulated between different houses for rituals.
What would that do?
It breaks the dynastic impulse. You can't hoard wealth and power for your genetic lineage if the entire community is your family, if your ancestors are everyone's ancestors.
That is a radical way to smash the concept of inheritance. You can't leave your fortune to your son if you don't really know which one he is, or if he's living 3 houses down and considers another family his own.
Exactly. And they had other, more direct mechanisms. We see evidence of what are called leveling behaviors. For example, food sharing norms were strict. Meat from a large hunt was shared publicly. Everyone got a piece.
Okay, that makes sense for high-value items.
But grain was private, stored in the house.
So grain was the danger zone for inequality to creep in.
It was. But it seems if a house got too elaborate or if a family started accumulating too much wealth, we see evidence of deliberate destruction.
They burned the rich guy's house down.
Sometimes. Or they would smash the high-value items inside. There are these heavy, massive grinding stones. They're called querns.
Querns.
These things were the primary capital equipment of the Neolithic. They took weeks or months of hard labor to carve from basalt. They were incredibly valuable. But we find them smashed to pieces when a house was abandoned or rebuilt.
So they are actively destroying capital. They are effectively saying, you can't take it with you, and more importantly, you can't leave it to your kids.
It is a powerful statement against intergenerational wealth transmission. They were actively fighting the natural tendency for wealth to accumulate. They saw inequality trying to creep in, and they literally smashed it with a hammer.
That is the aggressive part. They were constantly pruning the tall poppies to keep everyone at the same level.
But as we know from our own world, they couldn't hold it back forever.
No. Eventually, something changed. And this brings us to segment 3, the turning point. If simple farming didn't cause inequality, what did?
The paper by Bowles and Faccisato introduces a really critical distinction here. It is the difference between a labor-limited economy and a land-limited economy.
Okay, this feels like the core economic concept we need to get across. Let's unpack labor-limited. This is the early days. This is Tuttlehuyuk.
Yes, this is the garden farming era. You have a hoe, which is basically just a stick with a blade on it. You are digging up the ground by hand.
It's back-breaking work.
It's incredibly hard work. But here is the fundamental economic reality. Your total production is limited by your own arms and legs. You can only farm as much land as you and your family can physically work.
Right. Even if I say I own 1,000 acres, I can't actually farm it. I physically can't do it. My output is capped by my own biology.
Exactly. So in that world, land is abundant. There is plenty of space for everyone to have a garden. But labor is the scarce resource. In this world, getting rich is really, really hard.
You can't scale.
You can't scale up. You can work a little harder than your neighbor, maybe have a slightly bigger garden, but you hit a ceiling very quickly. You cannot become a farming magnate with a hoe.
So inequality is effectively capped by human biology. I only have 2 hands.
Precisely. In these economies, mu, which is the term economists use for the importance of material wealth inheritance, is very low. Wealth just doesn't transmit well across generations.
Okay, but then a technology comes along that completely changes the math. And it's not the seed, it's the plow. Specifically, the ox-drawn plow.
The plow. That's the villain of our story.
That is the smoking gun. That's the technology that breaks the world.
How does a simple plow change the equation so drastically?
Think about leverage, mechanical advantage. With a team of oxen and a plow, one single family can farm a massive tract of land, far, far more than they could ever hope to do by hand.
So suddenly, that biological ceiling is just gone. If I have the oxen, I can farm 10 times, maybe 20 times as much as the guy next door with the hoe.
Yes. But here is the absolute kicker. Not everyone can get the oxen.
The barrier to entry.
The barrier to entry. Oxen are expensive. You have to raise them for years. You have to feed them. They eat as much grain as a human, and you have to train them. It is a massive capital investment. The economists call this a minimum project size.
Okay, so it's like a startup. In the hoe era, anyone could start a garden. The barrier to entry was low. In the plow era, you need seed capital, and I mean literally, you need the ox to even play the game. Exactly right. So it becomes a rich get richer technology. If I'm just slightly wealthier than my neighbor and I have enough to buy the ox, I can then farm more land, which gets me more wealth, which lets me buy more land, which lets me buy more oxen.
And the other guy gets left in the dust.
And suddenly, land becomes scarce. One guy with the plow team takes up the space of 10 hoe farmers. Now, the equation flips. Land is scarce and labor is redundant. We don't need 10 guys with hoes anymore. We need one guy with a plow.
So what happens to the other 9 guys?
They lose their land. They become employees or tenants or serfs. They have to work for the guy with the plow just to survive.
And boom, there it is. Class society.
That is the fundamental shift from a labor-limited economy to a land-limited economy. Suddenly, owning the capital, the land, and the animals is vastly more valuable than doing the work.
That feels hauntingly familiar.
It does, doesn't it? And this also changed inheritance forever. In the hoe farming days, land often reverted back to the lineage or the village when you died. But with the plow, you have this incredibly expensive capital, the oxen, the plow gear, the huge tract of land. You want to pass that on to your specific son.
So the aggressive egalitarianism breaks down. You can't just smash the ox when you die. It's too valuable. Your family's future depends on it.
Exactly. Private property becomes entrenched. And that's when we see inequality spike in the archaeological record. The Gini coefficient starts to climb, and it doesn't stop.
Now, the sources mention that this didn't happen everywhere all at once. There are these fascinating failed experiments in inequality. Moments where it popped up and then, for whatever reason, vanished.
Yes. History is full of these false starts. The paper calls this episodic inequality, and these episodes are so important because they prove that inequality needs a very specific set of conditions to survive and become permanent.
One of the oldest examples they give is the mammoth hunters on the Russian plain. This is way, way back in the Ice Age, like 25,000 years ago. We find these incredibly elaborate burials, the Sungir burials. You have individuals, including children, covered in thousands of hand-carved ivory beads.
And each one of those beads took hours to make. So this represents thousands, maybe tens of thousands of hours of someone else's labor.
It suggests a massive concentration of wealth and social power. Ivory was like the Bitcoin of the Ice Age. But then, it disappears. The mammoth hunting culture vanishes as the climate warms, and that extreme inequality goes right along with it. It didn't stick.
And what about the Chumash in California? That was a really interesting one.
This is a great example of how environmental change can trigger inequality. The Chumash were coastal hunter-gatherers, and for a long time they were pretty egalitarian. But then the climate changed, and the local food sources on land dried up. The only way to get enough food was to fish deep offshore.
And for that, you need a boat.
You need a very specific kind of boat, a tamal, a plank canoe sealed with tar. These were very difficult and expensive to build. It was a form of capital. So the people who owned the canoes became the bosses. They controlled access to food.
Exactly.
Okay.
A canoe-owning elite emerged. They controlled the food supply because they owned the key technology. If you wanted to eat, you had to work for them.
It's the plow logic, but applied to the sea.
It is precisely the same economic logic. If you own the bottleneck technology, you own the society. But again, it was localized.
There's also the salt factory at Provadia. This one really captured my imagination because it feels so modern.
It's in Bulgaria from the Neolithic, and it was a literal factory.
Yeah.
They were boiling brine from a unique salt spring to create standardized salt bars, salt ingots, and these were used as currency across the entire region.
A Google license to print money.
Literally.
Yeah.
And the families who controlled that spring got fabulously wealthy. They built these massive stone walls around their settlement, some of the first stone fortifications in Europe.
Not to keep armies out.
No, to protect their hoard of salt from their envious neighbors. It was a fort built to protect private wealth.
But then the spring dried up.
The spring dried up, their business model collapsed, and the inequality evaporated. The site was abandoned.
So the lesson from all these episodes is that inequality requires a specific set of conditions. It needs a technology that is capital intensive, like a plow, or a special canoe, or a salt spring, where owning the thing allows you to massively outproduce everyone else.
But there is one final crucial piece of the puzzle, because having a plow makes you rich, but it doesn't stop your 9 landless neighbors from coming over at night with torches and burning your barn down.
Right. If I'm the only guy with an ox and I'm treating everyone else like dirt, the aggressive egalitarians are eventually going to come for me.
Unless you have protection.
Yeah.
Unless you have the state.
And that brings us to segment 4, the lock-in, how this becomes permanent.
This is the classic chicken or egg question in political science. Did the state create inequality, or did inequality create the state?
I feel like the standard answer, maybe the more Marxist answer, is that the state created it. The king shows up with his army, builds a castle, and demands taxes, creating a class system.
That's the common assumption. But the archaeology from Bowles and Fotosato shows the opposite. In place after place, we see high wealth disparity, really rich graves, big houses appearing before we see the palaces and the administrative buildings and the formal government structures. We see this very clearly in the Bronze Age.
So the rich people came first.
The rich people came first.
Yeah.
The inequality emerged organically from the new technologies, the plows, the long-distance trade routes, the control of metals. But then these new elites had a serious problem. They had all this wealth, and they were vulnerable.
You needed a police force.
They needed legitimacy and protection. So the proto-state emerges not to create inequality, but to manage and defend the inequality that already exists. It starts as a way to protect property rights.
So the state is basically a security firm for the plow owners.
In the beginning, you could argue that yes, it provided stability. It suppressed those leveling mechanisms we saw in Saraluyuk. You can't just go burn down the rich guy's house if he has a retinue of guards and the backing of the local temple.
So the state acts as a ratchet. It clicks the inequality in place and prevents it from ever sliding back to that more egalitarian baseline.
That's a perfect analogy. But it is worth noting, the sources say these early states were extremely fragile. Mesopotamia, for example, saw constant cycles of centralization and then total collapse.
It wasn't a one-way street.
Not at all. Democracy or assembly-based rule was actually quite common in the early cities because rulers didn't have a total monopoly on force yet. They still had to negotiate with other powerful families.
But eventually, they got it.
Yeah.
And the power of the state enables the ultimate and most brutal form of inequality, the darkest part of this story, slavery.
The sources are very clear on this. Slavery isn't just a social evil, it's an economic technology. It's a tool.
How so? What does that mean?
It is the formal conversion of human beings into material wealth. In that old labor-limited economy, you can't really own people. It doesn't make economic sense to feed and house a slave when they can only do as much work with a hoe as you can.
They're just another mouth to feed.
Exactly. But in a land-limited economy, where one person owns vast fields and needs hundreds of bodies to work them, slavery becomes immensely profitable.
And the state provides the coercion, the military power, to enforce it. You can't keep a large population of slaves without an army and a legal system that defines them as property.
Exactly. The state makes it possible.
Yeah.
And when you look at a mature slave society, like the Roman Empire, the inequality numbers just go off the charts. The Gini coefficient hits 0.7 or even higher.
But the expert in the paper, he notes the statistical bias there, right? That number is actually an underestimate.
Yes, and this is a really chilling point. When economists calculate inequality in Rome, they often count slaves as people with zero wealth. They are counted as the poorest of the poor. But that is technically wrong from the Roman perspective.
To Romans, the slave was the wealth.
They were the asset. They were the equivalent of a tractor or a bank account. So if you actually account for that, if you recalculate the Gini by understanding that human beings were property, the true level of inequality is even more staggering than the numbers show.
It's a sobering realization. We went from small bands, cooking meat around a fire, sharing everything because our very survival depended on it, to building empires based on owning other human beings, to work fields we couldn't farm ourselves.
It is the great paradox of progress. The same energy surplus that gave us big brains and art and culture eventually gave us the capacity to dominate one another on an industrial scale.
So let's bring this all home. We've covered millions of years in under an hour here.
We have. It's been a journey.
Let's do a quick recap for the listener just to lock this entire narrative in. Step 1, cooking.
Cooking unlocked the energy in our food. It allowed our guts to shrink and our brains to grow. It forced us to live on the ground, which created the need for firelit social circles, a division of labor, and pair bonds. It literally made us biologically human.
Step 2, the long Neolithic equality.
We started farming, but we didn't immediately become unequal. For thousands and thousands of years, a culture of aggressive egalitarianism kept the playing field level. We shared, we leveled, and we actively resisted hierarchy.
Step 3. The technology trap.
The ox-drawn plow came along and completely changed the logic of production. It made land scarce and labor redundant. It created a minimum project size, a huge barrier to entry that allowed the wealthy to pull away from the poor. It made things more valuable than work.
And finally, step 4. The state lock-in.
The emerging elites built structures, proto-states, to protect their newfound wealth from the egalitarian impulses of the masses. And eventually, they used that power to institutionalize slavery, locking that inequality into the very DNA of civilization.
It is a heavy story, but I don't know, it's also empowering in a weird way. It tells us that this massive inequality we see today isn't natural in the sense that it's always been there.
Right, it's not our inevitable fate.
It's a product of specific choices and specific technologies.
And that leads directly to the final provocative thought we wanted to leave you with.
Right, we're looking at this history, not just for trivia, not just to understand the past, but to understand us.
Yeah.
Today. Right now.
Think about that aggressive egalitarianism of the Neolithic. We often assume that humans are naturally greedy or naturally hierarchical, but the data shows thousands of years of active resistance to inequality. It is also in our nature to push back, to demand fairness.
And then think about the plow. It was a technology that fundamentally changed the value of human labor. It made capital, the ox, worth more than the worker, the farmer with the hoe.
And today, right now, we are facing a new wave of technology that promises to do something very similar. Automation, artificial intelligence, robotics.
These are technologies that, like the plow, have the potential to make huge swaths of human labor, well, redundant.
So if the plow drove the first great wedge in human equality by making things more valuable than work, what happens when AI can do both the thinking and the working? Are we heading for a new land-limited era where owning the servers, owning the compute is the only thing that matters?
Or will we find a way to tap into that ancient, aggressive egalitarianism again? Will we as a society find new ways to level the playing field before the cement dries on this new technological reality?
That is the question for the next century. And maybe, just maybe, looking back at a place like Satahoyok gives us a blueprint for how to start thinking about it.
A massive thank you to our sources, Bowles, Fochasato, Driver, and Wrangham, for giving us the map to this incredible territory. This has been The Deep Dive. Keep thinking, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.